Episode of the Play On podcast, your weekly instalment of all things Scottish football and beyond. I'm David Simmons, we've got Anthony Brown as always, and Stephen Commons in the studio tonight. On a week that saw the return of club football, we're asking a few important questions. Is Neil Lennon's time up at Celtic? Who's going to stop Rangers? And should Nisbet be called up for Scotland? But before we get cracking, we're going to discuss COVID-19 because it's not been in the news enough, has it, guys? So it's found its way to Scottish football. There was games called off at the weekend. Albion Rovers and Cowdenbeath was called off because 7 players contracted the virus, or they're self-isolating, haven't they? So it was called off, and I don't even think the SFA have got a plan in place as to what's going to happen. Is it going to be rescheduled, or do Cowdenbeath get awarded a 3-0 victory? Now, Boland's come out and said he doesn't want that. He thinks the game should be played, which fair play on him. Do you have any views on that, Stephen? Should the game be replayed? Should they just be given the 3 points, or is it Albion Rovers' fault for not following guidelines? Or
this is the thing, though, right? So you've got the same situation has happened in the SPL. Like they don't really want to kind of nail their colours to the mast one way or another, in terms of like saying, right, we're just going to give them a 3-0 win, or like, because it could happen to anyone at any time. Like these guys, I mean, there has been examples of silly football players like Bolingoli, the 2 guys for Rangers, the Aberdeen guys. They've all made mistakes, but a lot of the time you've got to remember these guys are part-time players, so they could be going to a job and like, or working in someone's house. So you could literally catch it anywhere, the same as any of the rest of us. You could be taking every precaution under the sun. So clubs should not be like hammered for something that's probably out with their powers. They can't control these guys 24 hours a day, especially the part-time guys who earn a living elsewhere. So I think they have to kind of make a decision. I feel bad for them because they are in almost a no-win situation at the moment, where they're probably looking at the situation going, what do we do here? Do we hammer them or do we not? So yeah, but once they've made a decision, I think they have to just stick with that for this safe kind of fairness and things like that. Because I mean, look at the situation we had last season at the tail end. Everyone was talking about fairness, what's fair on this team or that team. We can't have that situation again for Scottish football. We just need to draw a line under what's happening, make a decision, stick with it so it's fair for everybody going forward, and then see where it takes us. I
mean, obviously the stories broke this week as well about the under-21s having to self-isolate. Neil Lennon's come out publicly and said that it was a bit of a shambles, if you like. Stephen Robinson from Motherwell as well said that he was only notified at 10 o'clock on the Friday evening. How does that affect team selection, Anthony, do you think? How do managers have to quickly adapt to losing key players for the following day?
It's not ideal for any manager to be having to chop and change their team the night before a game or the morning of a game or whatever, but I mean, these are things that happen in football. Players get ill, players get injured at short notice, so it's something they just have to deal with. But I can understand their frustration, because they'll be planning their team ahead for the whole week. They'll have an idea what shape they're going to play, and just losing one player may mean you have to completely change the shape you're going to play, the approach you're going to play. So yeah, it's really frustrating for managers, but I mean, it's a situation that every club's going to have to deal with at some point along the line.
Neil Lennon and Derek McInnes should try being a Sunday League manager. This is what happens every single week.
The one thing that I'm thinking is, obviously you've got all these players that are now having to self-isolate and games are getting called off. We've still not seen the return of fans back to the stands. Can you imagine if we were allowing 5,000 to 7,000 fans back in the stadium and the players are getting this virus or having to self-isolate, and there's only like a squad of 20 of them? Can you imagine, Anthony, what it would be like if we had 5,000 people all amalgamating in one area?
In what sense? Do you mean
just like the possible spread of the virus? Is it still too early to bring fans back to the stadium?
You'd have to ask the medical experts. I don't have a clue whether we're safe to do that at the minute. I mean, they were telling us last week that Midlothian was going to move into Tier 2 and now we're back in Tier 3. So, I mean, it's all over the place. I wouldn't like to say whether we're ready to have fans in stadiums or not yet.
That's it. It's something we've never experienced before, so I mean, I do get that a lot of blame gets pointed to politicians in this, but they've never had to adapt to any situations like this, and obviously something that we all care about so much being football and sport, we just want to try and get back to some normality. Let's start with the fixtures then. So Friday night, like I said, we've seen club football return. East End Park, Dunfermline 2, Heart of Midlothian 1. You see that one coming, Anthony?
I wouldn't say I saw it coming, no, but it's not a massive shock when you look at the situation. Hearts had won every single game prior to that. Dunfermline have obviously been going well. Anybody who thinks Hearts were going to win every game this season is living in cuckoo land. There will be more setbacks along the way. I still expect Hearts to win the league. I still expect them probably to win it by a few points. but there will be setbacks along the way. There might even be another setback tomorrow against Alloa. The Hearts are not good enough to expect to turn up and beat anybody if they're not at full pelt. The reason they did so well in the last championship season is because they obviously got their big win against Rangers on opening day, and they were at it in all these games early in the season, and they managed to build a momentum. They managed to maintain that momentum right through past the Christmas period, and they had they were able to just blow teams away. I don't think this team's built to blow teams away the way that team was. They don't quite have the same pace and dynamism, I suppose, that team had. They have enough quality to win the league relatively comfortably, I would still say, but they're not going to turn up every week and win 3 or 4-0. They may get those results here and there, but away at Dunfermline, I dare say, that was never going to be a 2 or 3-0 at Hearts. It was always going to be a, can they grind it out? Can they get the sort of result that they got at Arbroath a couple of weeks ago? Because, I mean, this is an ongoing thing with Hearts. Supporters look at it and say, oh, they're playing Dunfermline, they're playing Alloa, they're playing Arbroath. Hearts should win 3 or 4-0.
Yeah.
It never works out like that. I mean, people that are shocked by Friday night's result haven't been watching Hearts for the last 20 years and paying attention, because these results crop up all the time, no matter how good or bad Hearts are. They've always got a result like that in them. They're not consistent enough. A club of Hearts' calibre will never be consistent enough to always put away supposed teams that they should be beating, if you like, in terms of their budget. It just doesn't work like that. And so, yeah, I mean, I was surprised they lost the game, but there will be more results like that along the way. I think on paper you would expect Hearts to win every individual match they play this year, but they won't win every single game. It's not possible.
What's your thoughts on the result, Stephen? Did you see this coming? Or do you agree with Anthony?
As Anthony said, like, I think the performances you could see were coming potentially sort of to this level. Again, though, just from a punter's point of view, I found, like, you sit before that game and you look at the two starting 11s, and don't get me wrong, I think Stevie Crawford's done a brilliant job with Dunfermline. I think they are organised, they are dogged, they know what they're doing, they all know their roles. But you look at some of those guys in that team, I didn't know who they were. Like, I'd never heard of them, and that's maybe arrogant on my part or ignorant. There was a lot of those guys who surprised me, and I would hope that wasn't the case for Robbie Neilson and his coaching staff, but it certainly looked like that. I mean, Hearts just looked like a team that were tired. They didn't have any kind of dynamism, as you said, in the midfield. And I don't know if Halliday and Ollie Lee are going to work long term as a partnership together in that system, because in that, I think they were brought in to play with a Ginnelly and a Jordan Roberts, the two fly-in wingers who are going to get at players. When those guys are not available, and you've got Stephen Naismith playing in a wide area, can you really afford to have two pragmatic midfielders that are going to sit in and break up play and make simple passes? I think you need to find someone, or like within the team already, or go and get someone who can, in games like that, take the ball box to box. And I know it's easy for me to sit here and say, go and find a player like that, because teams are probably looking all over the country for guys like that. But I just think that Hearts, for all the strength that they've got in their squad, I think they looked at times devoid of ideas, and they just didn't seem to play to their strengths, really. I
think it's quite important as well that we don't take too much away from Dunfermline, because they did play well. They're now 5 games undefeated. Are they title contenders for that league, possibly, Anthony?
You look where they are in the league, you would have to say they are title contenders. Whether that's still the case in 3, 4, 5 months' time, who knows? But certainly they're looking the likeliest team. You would have thought at the start of the season it would have been Dundee, but they've had a bit of a disastrous start. It doesn't look like they're going to be equipped to mount a challenge. It could well be one of these sort of almost not a scrappy race, but one where everybody's dropping points, so it becomes a 3 or 4 horse race almost, with Dunfermline, Wraith and Hearts. But I think over time Hearts' superior quality should shine through, all being well. But then throughout last season I was always saying Hearts were too good to go down, so who knows how
in
that
preparation of this game, how much, or if any, do you think it had that Stevie Crawford has worked with Robbie Neilson in the past? Would he have known how he was going to set up that Hearts squad to play, or is that irrelevant, do you think?
I think everybody knew how Hearts were going to set up, really. Like, I mean, Stevie Crawford is a an intelligent guy and he knows Nielsen really well. But I don't think that's the reason why Dunfermline won. I think you need to give them a lot of credit, and sort of they dictated a lot of the game. So it wasn't a case of them combating what Hearts were doing. They were basically saying, well, you're coming to our place, you'll play how we want to play. So I think you're like, people are maybe doing a bit of a disservice to Dunfermline for kind of the result and the way because they're concentrating mainly on Hearts dropped points. But as you said earlier, Dunfermline earned those points. So, but I think, anybody who's watched Hearts over the last 3, 4, 5 games and knew the players that were definitely going to be missing. I mean, they don't really have that much choice if you actually break the squad down in terms of like changing the style and changing the way that the team play. So I don't think. I just think I don't think Dunfermline got lucky. I think they just probably set out a better game plan than Hearts.
Yeah, and as you can see on the screen, we are still fully interactive. We're on half an hour early tonight. We're doing 6:30 until 7:30 instead of 7 o'clock until 8. So the question that we're asking is Neil Lennon's time up at Celtic, and that moves us on nicely to Saturday's fixture at Easter Road. It finished Hibs 2, Celtic 2. Easter Road against Hibs for Celtic seems to be a bit of a bogey fixture, doesn't it, Anthony? There's some sort of record there that Celtic haven't won there in a good few years, is that right?
6 or 7 years since they last won a league game there. They won the Scottish Cup game there a couple of years ago. But yeah, Hibs, we were saying last week, Hibs have tended to struggle in the supposed bigger games against your Celtic, Hearts, Aberdeen and Rangers recently. But Celtic are the one team that they seem to be able to compete against, certainly at Easter Road, and they did that again on Saturday. Should arguably have won the game. I mean, Porteous and Hanlon will be disappointed with their contributions to the 2 goals. Porteous' clearance went up in the air before the penalty, which was very soft, I must say. It did hit his hand, but very soft. You're entitled to feel aggrieved if that goes against you, even if it is, I suppose, by the letter of the law, a penalty. But just when you're 2-0 up and that happens to you, you must feel really hard done by from Paul McGinn's perspective. But Porteous will be disappointed that the clearance didn't go further away. It sort of went up in the air, and then Hanlon, again, part of it, unfortunate that it's on his weaker right foot as opposed to his left foot, otherwise it would have been out the park, no doubt. But just at that moment in the game, obviously be pretty fatigued, just holding on for grim death against a good Celtic team on his weaker foot. You can understand why it's happened, but you could see how frustrated he was when he kicked the ball straight to Laxalt, and obviously that was Celtic back in the game and away home with a point that they arguably didn't deserve.
Yeah. Gus Dixon, he's our first guy on the show tonight. We've struggled all season. New management is a must. Celtic need a new manager. Ryan Lennon should never have been appointed manager. He took over a well-structured, hungry team and they've gone downhill ever since. No one can tell me Neil Lennon has improved Celtic since taking over. Would you agree, Stephen?
Yeah, I would, to be honest. I mean, and people will argue back at that and say, well, he potentially, if they win against Hearts on in the 20th of December, that they're going to get another treble in the bag. But I've always said that, like, I don't think it takes an awful lot in terms of like managerial skill to manage a team like Celtic. If you've got a squad of players as talented as they are, then it is just a case of managing personalities, man management, and a lot of the game will come down to that. But what I think the Celtic board have done is they've almost kind of been asleep at the wheel in terms of they've taken the easy decision and said, right, the guy's got us the like another treble, so let's give him the full time job. When if they'd actually logically sat and looked at that situation and looked at how Neil Lennon's career has gone as a manager, I mean, he always seems to have this bang at the start where he comes in and he rattles a few cages and he gets the best out of his group. Like he did it the first time round at Celtic. Bolton, you could argue he was massively up against it financially, but then he went to Hibs and he took a Hibs team that couldn't get out the Championship and he turned them into a force. Like he had good players and he managed to recruit a lot of these good players at Hibs and he got them playing ferociously, like, and that is Neil Lennon's style of football. And he famously said when after Brendan Rodgers left that he was going to bring the Thunder back to Celtic Park. Well, he might have done that for a small period of time, but as I said, any football chairman or someone who's making decisions at a club the size of Celtic should be looking at that and saying, right, he's done us a short term great job, we thank him for what he's done and we pack him up the road. And they should have been thinking about that 6 months prior to what they were doing. So they've maybe shown him a bit of loyalty, but I think now it's come to a stage where I can't see how he's going to continue to do this. He doesn't look like the same Neil Lennon.
I was just going to say that we touched on this off air when we were having a little chat, and you remember him for Hibs when they were scoring. He was doing like aeroplane signs down the touchline. He was buzzing. He was loving it. Is he thrown in the towel, Anthony? Do you think?
I don't think he's thrown in the towel. I don't think that's in his nature, but he doesn't seem to have that same spark. People would argue that's maybe a good thing, because obviously that spark brought a lot of scrutiny and trouble to his door, in the sense that he was getting himself involved in flashpoints and what have you. So you could argue he's just a more mature coach, a more mature manager, and able to control his emotions a lot better than he could before. But whether that's been to the betterment of Celtic, the evidence suggests, certainly in the more recent past anyway, that it's not working. You can't say it's because he's not as sparky as he was that they're struggling, but certainly he seems to have lost that. He's not visibly shown that fire that he had. But at the same time, Celtic were going pretty well when he first went in, and he wasn't as sparky as he had been in his first spell. So I think it would be wrong to say that's the reason that he's not getting the results. I think, but something's clearly gone wrong somewhere, or they're definitely, as a team, they've lost their way. They've plateaued at best, and it's hard to see them. I said a few weeks ago they'll come good and they'll still win the league. I'm now pretty sceptical about that. I'm not convinced that that's going to happen now. I still wouldn't rule it out. It's still possible. We've seen this before where Celtic look like they're down and out and they come back, but it is feeling now more like a proper malaise rather than just a form dip.
This is the thing, you look at what Celtic did last season, and then obviously Rangers, for whatever reason, after the winter break, they absolutely collapsed. But Celtic, what people always talk about how Rangers collapsed after that winter break. Celtic were a machine. They absolutely just annihilated, just win after win after win, and they just ploughed through. But I just don't see, with the way things are just now, it would take an absolute, just like some sort of miracle for things to turn around in that same way, for Celtic to go from where they are now to a position where they would just be rocking up and battering teams, winning games before they'd even kicked off sometimes, just because of the way that they are ploughing through teams. But you look at it now, and they've got to play Ross County at the weekend, and you look at I don't see any game where you think they are 100% going to go and destroy that team.
I think that's the biggest thing now. I'm looking at the cup final thinking, I genuinely think Hearts could win this cup final. I don't think it would be a massive upset, and considering Hearts are no great shakes at the minute, they're a decent side on paper. They've proved that they can compete with supposed higher end teams when they beat Hibs, but it's not a vintage Hearts team by any stretch, and they're playing in the Championship on the back of a relegation. They've just lost to Dunfermline. But if Neil Lennon's still in charge of Celtic and they're still in a similar vein of form, I would feel Hearts have got a chance. I'm not saying they will win the cup, but I would think Hearts, on the basis of the way they played under Craig Levein last year in the cup final 18 months ago against a superior Celtic team to this one, I would think Hearts would definitely fancy their chances. And that's probably an indictment of where Celtic are at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. Joseph's coming with a comment. His thunder has been replaced with a mild wind. I hope it can be turned around more than anything, but I don't see it. Scott Bain has come out in the press at the weekend. He said that he reckons anyone who writes off Celtic now is just silly. Do you agree?
Yeah,
is it still too early?
It's a silly man who's just written them off.
Is it still too early to write them off? Rangers, 11 points clear now?
Listen, there's nothing to say that Rangers don't have another collapse in their bag. There's nothing in that Rangers team that's proven over a long period of time. They don't have any proven regular league winners. Their manager never won it. I've never won a league as a player. He's never won anything as a manager yet. So I'm not writing Rangers off, because I think, as we all know, I tipped the Rangers to win the league. So, but I think it's not a foregone conclusion that they're just going to go and win every single game. But it's got to the stage now where Celtic are now at a stage where they can't really afford to lose any more games. They can't, every team's got it in the bag to have a few blips here and there, but Celtic seem to have now used all their blips early doors. They've seemed to be in a situation where they're going to have to go on some sort of miraculous run of beating teams now, because it doesn't look like Rangers are going to have that stumble in the bag. But that's not to say like none of us have got a crystal ball. Like I'm sure none of us, when Celtic got beat at Parkhead by Rangers last season, and then Rangers went into that winter break, I'm sure none of us saw what was going to happen after that winter break happening last season. So it's not a foregone conclusion, absolutely not, and no one should write Celtic off completely. But what we would say is this is the most precarious situation that Celtic have been in a decade.
It feels like every big game they're falling short, whether it's the Champions League or the Ferencváros game recently. Every big game they seem to be hitting the skids in some way. Rangers at home, just when you think they're maybe getting a bit of momentum, they have another shocking result, or one that you would think they would have turned up and got a wee bit of momentum by winning 2 or 3. They won at Motherwell a few weeks ago. You'd have thought they might have built on that. And then they go to Hibs and they're 2-0 down after however long, and then needing to rescue it with a last minute goal. It just feels like they're not able to get anything going at the minute, which is very un-Celtic like.
You've got to look at it as there's a combination of things as well. Like saying that Lennon's sort of general malaise and his what supposed lack of energy for what we can kind of see on the telly is a contributing factor, but I don't think it's the only factor. Like there's loads of things. Look at the comments that he's made in the press after games, like after big defeats. He's questioned the players' motivations.
Has he lost the changing room? Maybe has the changing room turned against him?
I think it's very difficult to say. We're literally just watching what we can see on telly, and it's not. I mean, you can't say for definitively one way or another he's lost the dressing room, because until the players come out and publicly slate him or publicly speak out against him, you're never going to know that. And you would hope that wouldn't be the case, but all the evidence would point to that is the case. Like, the players do not seem to be playing for him. Like, they don't seem to be running through brick walls. But at the same time, he's not doing himself any favours either, because Celtic have got a big squad there. Like, he should be the Neil Lennon that we all remember as a sort of swashbuckling manager. You wouldn't have put it past him to say, if there was and I'm picking players at random here, if there was an Edouard or a Christie who were maybe not doing what they were told or not playing to what he would just whip them out the team and say, right, that's fine, go and sit on the bench for 3 weeks, I'll go and play somebody else. But he publicly slaughters these players and says that they're not giving him this, or their heads aren't here, they don't want to be here. The following week he makes one change or 0 changes in the team. So what message is that sending?
Yeah. He's such a different type to Brendan Rodgers as well, so you wonder if it's maybe not necessarily a case of him losing the dressing room. I don't know if he has or not. I don't like that phrase, because that implies that the whole dressing room is in the same boat, when there's lots of individuals. Some will be with the manager, some will maybe not fancy him. That's probably the case in every dressing room throughout Europe. There probably are guys that like the manager and guys that don't.
No, I agree with that, definitely.
So to say you've lost the dressing room, that implies that the whole dressing room is in revolt, and I think that, I don't know quite how the Celtic dressing room is, but I dare say there are a lot of guys in that Celtic dressing room who like the way Brendan Rodgers worked, because he's obviously a bit of a Rolls Royce in terms of modern day Celtic managers. He's the benchmark, if you like, in terms of the way, I mean, he's proven at Leicester how good a manager he is. He proved by being at Liverpool that he was a top class manager, and Lennon, with the best will in the world, a very good manager in Scottish football terms, in terms of what he did at Celtic in his previous reign, and also what he did in his first 2 years at Hibs. But he's nowhere near the level of Rodgers in terms of his general accomplishments across the board, and he has a totally different way of talking to players. I really like Neil Lennon on a personal level, but in terms of the way he manages his players, I don't know if he's got the same sort of manner that perhaps Rodgers would have had, where he would have had everybody sort of pulling with him. I could imagine Lenny going in a bit hard on certain players if they fell short, and some will be able to take that, others maybe not so. So I mean, there'll be all these little issues of certain players. Maybe there'll be players like Scott Brown who can handle all that. There'll be other players that are maybe see that as a bit of an old school approach. I don't know how Lennon manages his players, so I'd be reluctant to say that that's how he is, but certainly there's that perception that he has got that sort of little bark, if you like, just to try and fire players up, and how well the players react to that in the modern age, if you like.
Yeah, I mean, we've had a few comments in so far tonight, mostly from Celtic fans. Obi Boy said the league's over if Lennon stays. If Lennon goes, who do they replace him with, Stephen?
So again, it's not a nice conversation.
There's not a quick fix, is there? I mean,
there isn't. I mean, there's kind of two. I would say there's two ways of thinking. They either put all their eggs in, they do everything possible to try and stop or try and get 10, like try and not give up this dream of 10 in a row. And I've said this before. I know how, like, I can realise how important it is to Celtic fans 10 in a row. But as I said a couple of weeks ago in this podcast, what happens after 10? What happens, win, lose or draw, what happens after 10? You have to have a plan in place. So the two trains of thought is you either go for a short-term fix, whether that be an older experienced manager like Martin O'Neill comes back or whatever, or you go for whatever your contingency plan was. Like,
it's funny, sorry to interrupt, Stephen, that you've mentioned Martin O'Neill, because Ian McIntosh has been in touch. O'Neill's time is come and gone, and don't even dare mention Roy Keane, he says as well.
See, somebody like Roy Keane would actually probably... No. It could go one way or another with that.
No chance.
And this is why we love football, because it's all about opinion. It's all about opinions.
This is the problem Celtic have. It's very similar to Hearts last year. I go back to Hearts when they got rid of Craig Levein. They needed, in hindsight, they needed a steady pair of hands that was going to keep them up. At the time, I didn't think that was the case. I thought Hearts would have too much in their locker to be sucked into that relegation battle, and I thought they could have appointed anybody, taken a bit of a gamble, been a bit bold, and that's why I was so excited about the Daniel Stendhal appointment. I thought that was a great appointment on paper, and it completely backfired because he wanted to change the culture at Hearts
mid-season.
But you can't do that mid-season, or it's very hard to do mid-season. He would have been ideal coming in a close season with a full pre-season to buy his own players, bring in his own players rather, and get his sort of ethos over to the squad. Doing it mid-season, as we've seen with the benefit of hindsight, was a disaster. They would have probably been better off keeping Craig Levein the way that season unravelled, because Hearts fans may disagree, but I would say with Levein they would have got themselves off the bottom of the league. It might have been grim, it might have been pretty brutal to watch, but I don't think that they've finished in last place in March. So this is the thing Celtic need to be wary of. It's all very well getting rid of Neil Lennon, but you need to think about who your successor is. So do you go and bring in a guy from outside who has no real... I know people say it doesn't really matter being a Celtic man, but you still have to understand this intensity that is going to come with... I mean, you're hiring a manager 11 points behind Rangers in one of the biggest seasons in Celtic's modern history.
Yep.
Who's going to want that job? Who's going to be able to handle the demands of that? And then you look at recent guys that have done it. Martin O'Neill and Gordon Strachan are the two that are still kicking about to some extent, who have done it and done it to a decent standard. And I think it was Keith Jackson in the Daily Record suggesting that Strachan may be the go-to man if they pull the trigger now on a short-term basis until the end of the season, which again comes back to that debate about, are you just going for the 10 in a row and then you regroup in the summer and rebuild after that? Because I don't think any Celtic fan would really want Gordon Strachan in as a long-term solution. But even I would argue in the short term...
would know that though. Gordon Strachan would know that he wouldn't be a long-term fix. So why would somebody like Gordon Strachan, who's got quite a cushy number at Dundee, he seems to have a lot of influence at that club, seems to be doing a decent enough job there, why would he want to put himself back into the rough and tumble of especially an old firm?
If he came in, stopped Rangers winning this title,
absolutely.
then he probably is he's
a hero. Yeah.
I think anyone that comes in and would turn that around would be a hero. One name that's getting branded about quite a lot is Eddie Howe. David Livy's been on. He's messaged us on the interactive side of things. This is a result of the Celtic board cheating their fans and applying a cheap option in Neil Lennon. Eddie Howe for the job, he thinks. Would that be a good replacement, Stephen?
Again, it's so difficult to say. I mean, Eddie Howe for me is a project manager. Like he goes in again. You can only judge him really on Bournemouth, because at Burnley it was not a great success, but I think there was a lot of things to do with his sort of personal side of his life at that time. But you look at what he did at Bournemouth. He took Bournemouth from literally one kick of the ball away from being out the Football League to the Premier League, and then I mean, obviously things didn't go great for him last season. He ended up losing his job, but he's a project manager, and to me, he's the guy that you bring in when the 10's done. So when the 10 in a row is done one way, whether it's win or whether it's not win 10 in a row, that's the start of a project. Like, I don't care what any Celtic fan says, or like at the end of that rainbow, what do you guys think? Like, what do you think is going to happen? Like at the end of that, once the ticker tape falls and you've either won the 10 or it's red, white, and blue ticker tape, at the end of that process, you're going to have to start again, pretty much. Like the guys like Edward, Christie, they're probably going to leave. Like Scott Brown's going to retire, so you're going to have a rebuild job on then. So that, for me, that's when Eddie Howe becomes a good, strong candidate for Celtic at that point. But to bring him in mid-season in a league he doesn't know, surrounded by a lot of players he probably won't know, it's a lot of pressure to put on a guy.
It's going to be, say he has a slight revival, but they still don't win the league. He's straight off the bat, he's tarnished as the guy who blew 10 in a row, even if it's not his fault. Spot it was what he inherited.
No, it should be interesting to see how that goes. I mean, you touched on the whole Craig Levein side of things at Hearts. Are Celtic maybe going to fall into that trap? Because let's be honest, Hearts held on to Craig Levein for maybe a month or so too long. They should have really got rid of him and gave more time for whoever came in to try and save the club. Are Celtic falling into that trap? Are they holding on to Lennon maybe a bit too long? But I don't like, obviously, we don't want to see anybody lose their job. But in a industry that's solely focused around results, are Celtic better making a decision now, or are they better leaving it and see how it progresses in the next coming weeks?
It's a gamble either way, because I don't think anybody would. Well, there's going to be guys who would jump at the chance to manage Celtic, don't get me wrong. But as I said, coming in 11 points behind Rangers, even with 2 games in hand, you're effectively 5 points behind, assuming you win your 2 games in hand. And I mean, there's going to be massive expectations on the shoulders of the new guy coming in, but it's just the way football is. You're
right. You're going to have some guy with some set of balls on him to come into that sort of setup and convince these guys that 11 points, we'll make that up, guys, no problem. Like, you're going to have a guy who's going to have to hit the ground running, who's going to come into a very high pressured situation, fans or no fans. That was probably the biggest sort of job that would be going in British football at that point. You know what I mean? So it's high pressured. You're going to have a guy who's either been around the block, who will get immediate respect, who will walk in that door and no one's questioning his CV, no one's questioning where he's been, whether he's good enough for Celtic. You're going to have a guy like that, or someone who can very quickly convince these players that he's the man to turn around their season.
There's not many obvious candidates out
there. Isn't.
No,
I
mean, when we're talking about Roy Keane, that pretty much sums up where we're at in terms of
Roy Keane's
potential
linked with a Hearts
candidates.
job. You know what I mean? Like, this is the same level. He shouldn't have, like, for his managerial career, he should be nowhere near the Celtic job. Like, he has done nothing to suggest that he should be the next Celtic manager. But he's in the conversation. I mean,
David Moyes is usually linked, but he's in the Premier League at the minute, so I don't really see an obvious candidate. I mean, Alec Neil has been spoken or rumoured about. I don't know. Is Alec Neil a Celtic calibre manager? I don't know. I just don't see anybody out there that's ready made for this role and at the right stage in their career for it. And especially given the magnitude of the task. As I said, appointing in pre-season is a totally different ballgame. You can almost take a gamble a little bit and see like a Dyla type appointment. Yeah. Or you can go and get any type of manager, whoever you fancy. But mid-season, you've got to be pretty precise with who you're targeting.
What David Livy said there is a very good point, though, because the Celtic board had their emergency appointment when Lennon came in the first time round. So, like, what are they doing? They're just lurching from one emergency appointment to the next.
That's what I was thinking.
They should have, like, when Lennon got, like, that should have been their short-term fix. And in that time where Neil Lennon is doing everything in his power to continue to win that treble that they were currently in, they should have been working behind the scenes. They should have had the head of football, or whoever it is Nicky Hammond, that's the head of football for Celtic. He should have been behind the scenes creating a plan and saying, this is the guy we get in, this is the management team we want. And by the way, that's another thing, the management team. Like, he's had no say in that management team. Like, anybody who's done anything in football, you're only as good as the people around you who you trust to do the training, to get the message that you want across to the players. And I'm not saying that it's failing because he couldn't pick his management team, but again, that's a contributing factor. So they should have been, at that point, making a plan to get a management team in place that they thought was going to take them on for not just one season to the 10, take them on for 3, 4, 5 seasons and start a new project of sorts. Like, yep. I just think it's so short term for the Celtic board. In
a way, the worst thing that happened to them was that fight back in the cup final against Hearts. I know, obviously, they were delighted to win it at the time, but I think at that point there was a lot of doubt about whether Lennon was going to get kept on.
If they lost the final to Hearts, then you're talking about a different club now.
Lenny got offered the job in the shower after 2 late goals that were mistakes by Hearts players in effect. So it was a sort of sliding doors moment, I suppose, for Neil Lennon and for Celtic. You just wonder, obviously they'll be delighted that they won that cup and kept the treble and all that going. Mm-hmm. But has it prompted them to make a knee-jerk reaction that they now regret? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, we could devote a 2, 3, 4 hour long podcast show on Neil Lennon himself and the whole Celtic thing. But if you're a subscriber to our YouTube channel, you'll know that there is a daily Celtic podcast, a Celtic State of Mind. It's available. It's our sister show on the same station. Please watch that daily to see how this unfolds, and we'll obviously touch on it again next Monday night. Moving on, but I mean, we were talking about the Hibs Celtic game, and we ended up devoting so much time to Neil Lennon because it's such a big talking point. One thing we can't really do in the same sort of way as Dunfermline, we can't take away Hibs' performance. They were 2-0 up, fair enough. They ended up conceding silly goals. But again, on the score sheet, it was a guy Nisbet. Does he deserve a Scotland call-up? What's your thoughts on that, Anthony?
You certainly wouldn't begrudge him it if he got a call-up because he's scoring goals. He's taken a step up in his stride in terms of going from Wraith Rovers to Dunfermline to Hibs. So you wouldn't bet against him then taking the next step up to international football in his stride. I mean, I wouldn't say he has to be in the squad by any stretch because there's an argument that there are other strikers performing at a higher level down in England and what have you. So I wouldn't say that he has to be in that squad, but certainly if he was picked, you wouldn't say he doesn't deserve it. I mean, on the basis that Shanklin's in, you could argue Nisbet's been a bit more consistent, certainly in the Premiership, than Shankland has been. I really like Shankland, I have to say, but Nisbet seems to be a wee bit more prolific in the top flight, so on that basis you could make a case for Nisbet being in the squad.
I mean, that's the thing. If you look at the forward attacking options that there's McBurney, there's Dykes, Griffiths, Burke, and like you said, Anthony Shankland. Does he deserve a place in that squad, Stephen?
Yeah. I mean, he deserves to be in the conversation for the squad. Like, if he's coming in potentially to replace Shankland or Ollie Burke, or like, I don't see him coming in there and being an immediate starter. I think he's probably going to be the same sort of role that Mark McNulty had when he was at Hibs. He's going to come in, they'll get a taste of him. I would be very surprised if in the games in the run up to the tournament, when it actually comes around, if he doesn't start putting guys like Nisbet into the team and maybe McCrory for Aberdeen and players like that, he probably just wants to see get in and around the squad, see how they integrate with the guys, because as much as you're saying like his form is probably better than Shankland's is at the moment in the Premier League, what you're forgetting is that Shankland's also been in and around that squad for the last 6 or 7 international breaks or international meetups, so he might have a really good relationship with a lot of the guys in the squad, and like, it's all about getting that dynamic, and I'm not saying for a second that Kevin Nisbet would come in and upset that, but if Steve Clarke is of the thinking that Kevin Nisbet and Shankland are at similar levels and they're going to potentially give him the same sort of thing, like maybe a 5-10 minutes off the bench in a game, then he's going to go with the guy that he knows, and he's going to go with the guy that's been there before and been around the guys, and everyone kind of sees it. But I'll be very surprised if Kevin Nisbet doesn't get, especially if he keeps up the form he's on, doesn't get at least a chance over the next couple of international meetups.
Yeah, no, definitely. Looking at other results from Saturday, Dundee United beat Hamilton 2-1. Hamilton missed a penalty as well. They're looking favourites to be relegated, and I'm very conscious that, as I said before, I don't want to see anybody lose their job, but in football it does happen. Managers do move on. We talked a couple of weeks ago about Brian Rice. Anthony, do you think it's time for Hamilton to try and make a change, just to try and save the club and keep them in the Premier League?
There's probably less pressure on the Hamilton board than there is on the Celtic board, in the sense that it's not a disaster for Hamilton to get relegated to the Championship. I think they would probably, not that the fans would accept it or would be happy with it, but I think most people look at Hamilton as a Championship club operating in the Premiership at the minute, so there's not quite the same sort of sense of disaster if they were to get relegated as, say, Hearts getting relegated, for instance. So, I mean, it depends how Hamilton are a traditionally loyal club in terms of the way they stick with their managers, so it may be that they genuinely feel Brian Rice is the guy for them come hell or high water, and they're going to stick with him all the way, which is fair play to them if that's the way they want to go. So I wouldn't like to say it's time for him to go or not, but certainly it feels like they're in a rut now that, again, like Neil Lennon and Celtic, that you can't see them getting out of anytime soon.
I said a couple of weeks ago that, like, that Hamilton team have absolutely no right to be where they are. The squad of players that they've got, I think Brian Rice has done a great job up till now to kind of, and his predecessors have done a great job up till now to kind of keep them where they are. But at the same time, like, what realistically, what more can you get out of group. Like, that's what the Hamilton board need to kind of ask themselves. They need to look at it and go, are we where we are? Because quite literally, we've got a group of young guys who are potentially not quite at their peak, and they're not quite at the level that we need them to be at, but he's getting everything out of that group of players. So that's the question that needs to be asked. And I don't think for a second that those Hamilton players are going into training every day going, this manager's useless, like, let's get rid of him. Like, I just don't think they're at that stage. I think a lot of them should be very grateful that they are where they are. But listen, football's a fickle thing. They could get rid of him and it might turn round again, and Hamilton could do the Houdini Great Escape again. Who knows? Yeah.
One thing I want to talk about, and we've talked a lot about managers and stuff, but I read this in the paper and I thought it was a bit of an odd statement for the Livingston gaffer to come out. Gary Holt, he's come out and said that he may have to consider his position at the club because it seems like he can no longer motivate the players. I mean, that could probably be said about Neil Lennon, like we said there, Brian Rice. But is it strange, Anthony, you've worked in newspapers, that it's not usual for managers to come out and make statements like that, is it?
No, it's quite a strong line from him. He's either being brutally honest, and fair play to him if he is, or he's playing mind games with his players, trying to make them feel guilty, I suppose, for putting them in this predicament where there's a bit of heat on him. I dare say there probably isn't any heat on him at the moment because he has done such a good job over a period of time at Livingston that he's probably earned the right to go through a difficult period. But certainly Livingston wouldn't want to find themselves... They wouldn't want to find themselves in a position after Christmas whereby they're embroiled in a 2 or 3 horse race to avoid relegation, because generally they've done pretty well over the past couple of seasons, so this will be new territory for them in the sense of being in a relegation battle. But yeah, it's quite unusual to hear a manager speaking so candidly, I guess, about his own position when there doesn't seem to be that much heat from the outside on him.
Yeah, it's a strange one. So that came after, obviously, a 1-0 defeat at home against St Mirren. Other results in the Scottish Premier League: Kilmarnock 3, Ross County 1, and St Johnstone 1, Motherwell 1. If we look into the Championship on Saturday, there was a few shock results because Wraith have been flying. Cali 2, Wraith 0. Did you see that one coming, Stephen?
To be honest, no, I didn't. But I think I said this last week that I was really impressed with Inverness when they played Hearts. Looking back on it now, I don't know whether it was just because Hearts are kind of not quite at the races yet, but I thought they were really good. I thought they were well organised. They had a lot of players missing. It was a John Robertson type team. It just went, got to a certain stage, tried to stay in the game as long as he could with the squad of players he had, and then just brought some boys on off the bench and went for it. The Championship in Scotland, just like a lot of leagues, there seems to be no real consistency to it. There's results just popping up here, there, and everywhere that you think, oh, where did that come from? So as much as I think Wraith have been given a lot of plaudits for the way that they've played, again, I said this a couple of weeks ago, they played Hearts in the Betfred Cup, where Hearts' absolute reserve team, and Hearts demolished them. So it's hard to really gauge where a team like Wraith Rovers are. Whether it's just been a really solid start from them and they'll probably maybe fade away to maybe a mid-table finish, which I'm sure if you offered them that at the start of the season, they would have bit your hand off for it. So, the more that teams around Hearts keep nibbling points off each other, that's good enough for me. Like.
So moving on to Sunday's game, Rangers 4, Aberdeen 0. 11 points clear now at the top of the league are Rangers. I mean, it's our best league start since 1967. Some might say that that's null and void, but they don't look like even conceding any goals, never mind dropping any points. Is it too early to say they're unstoppable, Anthony?
Yeah, it's too early to say they're unstoppable, but certainly I read an article in the Scotsman, I think it was today, Stephen Halliday's match report, and he said it's Rangers' title to lose, and I think that's fair analysis. 11 points clear at this stage, even allowing for Celtic's 2 games in hand. The way Rangers are playing, I think you would say it is their title to lose. Because even if Celtic were to... You're needing Celtic to win their 2 games in hand and then make up another 2 games on Rangers, effectively either win 2 of the last 3 derbies or pick up an extra 6 points over the course of the season. So that's going to take some going from Celtic to overhaul that. I mean, it could easily have... Teams... Look at this is a totally different example, but remember at this time 2 years ago, Hearts were top of the league. I think they were 6 points clear at this stage 2 years ago, and they barely won a game until the end of the season. Obviously, this Rangers team's made a far sterner stuff than that Hearts team were, and they've got better players. They've got a proper winning mindset now. They're not conceding goals. They've got real quality in all departments. So you wouldn't envisage any major collapse from them. But I suppose even 3 games without a win suddenly would open the door for Celtic if Celtic were to get their act together. That's 2 big ifs. You're relying on Rangers collapsing and Celtic getting ultra consistent, which neither scenario looks like coming to fruition at the minute. So yes, it looks like Rangers title at the minute, but there is still 6 months of the season to go. So
that's it. They just look relentless though, Stephen, don't they? They look like they're just going to turn over anything that gets in their way.
Yeah, I mean, if you take this game at the weekend as just pull that out and just look at, I don't think that's fair to do that, because I think Aberdeen had a lot of guys that were missing at quite a late
just
stage.
say I predicted that last week.
You
4
did.
or 5 now.
You did actually. Yeah, and a few of my friends actually gave you quite strong abuse for that, Anthony. So, but no, yeah, you did predict it. But yeah, Derek McInnes's game plan, I think, was probably ripped up at Friday morning or whatever it was, and so I don't think it's fair to just judge it on that game. But you look at the season as a whole. Like, they had McLaughlin in goals at the start of the season. They've now got McGregor. Their defence is not really chopped and changed a lot, but they've taken central defenders out. They've put other central defenders in. Balogun was in at the weekend. Hollander plays some other games. But as I said a couple of weeks ago, what Rangers have got is that they have a system that they've worked on for 3 years or 2.5 years, where it maybe didn't go right at times, and they've maybe learned along the way. But they now are so well drilled in that system. Like, they might not have the best individual players if you compare it to Celtic man for man, but as a team and as an organised unit, they are streets ahead. They have got a system that they've found that plays to their strengths, that other teams are struggling to break down, obviously, by the looks of the goals that they're conceding. And they just seem to, everything is going in the right direction for them at the moment. But, as we said earlier, nobody saw the derail that came last season, so there's nothing to say that something miraculous. Look at Liverpool this season. They've went into the season looking like strong favourites for the title, and don't get me wrong, they're still going well now, but they've lost their 2 first choice centre halves long term. Something like that happens to Rangers. They lose, I don't know, say Morelos and Roof, and you're then going for a season with just Itten as your first choice goal scorer, and then something, you know what I mean, anything can happen. But I just think, as you say, all the signals are pointing in one direction for Rangers at the moment, and it's not good news for Celtic fans.
I found it amusing that obviously Rangers, things couldn't be going better for them on all fronts, and then they still have this story where Morelos goes in the huff when he gets subbed and it becomes the headline on the day after. They just can't sort of get him quite right.
They just can't get him to toe the party line at all. But in a way, you want to see that for your players. You want them to be
Morelos
disappointed.
is brilliant, absolute quality player. I'm not knocking him, but it's just funny that he always seems to be in the headlines. No matter how well things are going, there's always something from him that just upsets the apple cart a wee bit.
Well, however it pans out, we'll be here every Monday night to talk about it at the Play On podcast. Looking ahead to some of the fixtures that are coming up, we've got 2 games in Edinburgh tomorrow night. Hibs welcome St Johnstone to Easter Road, and it's Hearts who welcome bottom place Alloa. Would we both be in agreement that it's going to be 2 home wins there? Anybody want to contribute towards that? Anybody think otherwise?
Statement on the back of recent. No, I think
I'll say it. 2 home wins.
I mean, on paper, you've got Hearts, which are up the top end of that league. Alloa at the bottom, not doing too great. Hibs, in fairness, they should have really beat Celtic at the weekend against St Johnstone, who are a bit up and down this season.
For the Hearts one, if Hearts don't beat Alloa, there will be another plane getting flown over. That's what some Hearts fans are. That's their mindset. If Hearts lose again, 2 games in a row against Dunfermline and Alloa, there will be people going bananas. Yeah, there will be people losing their minds.
There are people losing their minds after losing at Dunfermline, aren't it?
Is it too high a standard that the Hearts fans have set?
It's not so much too high a standard. It's always been the way at Hearts, so that you're only one bad result away from a crisis, unless you're top of, well, I say unless you're top of the league and flying. Hearts are top of the league and flying, and they've lost 1 game and they're still an uproar.
Actually not,
well,
Anthony.
Oh, right, fair enough. You know what I mean? They've won every game. They had a 100% record until Friday. But there's always going to be, especially in a situation where they're in the Championship, any defeat's going to be scrutinised and over-scrutinised and what have you. So if they, as Stephen says, if they end up slipping up tomorrow night, then it'll suddenly you go from having a great start, winning every game, to, oh shit, that's 2 games in a row against teams we should have beat. There's big problems here.
Well, the last time that I know I joked about the plane flying over with the no style, no substance, Nielsen out or whatever it said. Hearts went second in the league that same game, or like the week after, the week before he got sacked. I think they beat Rangers at Tynecastle, like before he left to go to MK Dons, and they went second. Like, snap your hand off now for second bottom in the SPL. Never mind second. Yeah. So it was just ridiculous. See, looking back on it now, and I'm the first to admit, I wouldn't have been paying to get a plane flown over, but I was very strongly in the Robbie's taking us as far as he can go now. Let's change it up. It just shows you the arrogance of football fans. Like, what on earth are we expecting more than what Robbie Neilson was actually achieving at that moment in time? So I think people, including myself, just need to kind of chill out a wee bit and just let them do what they're going to do, and hopefully they get the win tomorrow and everything will be back to some sort of normality. We can kind of move on a wee bit from that Dunfermline game.
Don't get me wrong, if they don't win tomorrow, there has to be some sort of inquest, and it would then start to be a mini crisis as such, which is just the nature of being at a club of the calibre of Hearts. But to go, I think there's been, yes, they deserve criticism for the performance on Friday night, but some of it's gone a wee bit over the top. All of a sudden, all the players are useless. Get him out. And that's just the way it goes at Hearts. And then you win the next couple of games, and you win it's very reactive, and that's one thing I found really hard covering Hearts week to week, was the sort of hyperbolic nature of the support, because you found whatever way you went, there was always someone who was extreme one way or the other and just couldn't see your perspective. But the reality is, Hearts have won, was it 8 games before Friday?
Yeah. And
they've lost against a fired up Dunfermline team. It's not like they lost at Alloa. They lost at one of the teams that will be up there, certainly in the playoff mix. I'm not saying they should lose to Dunfermline, but they will lose to teams like that as this season goes on, because a fired up championship team can easily counteract off the pace sort of Premiership calibre team. Yeah. We've seen that a million times in Scottish football. Yeah. Anybody who isn't prepared for that possibility is living in cuckoo land. Teams at Dunfermline's calibre are always capable on their day of beating any team in Scotland, and I include Celtic and Rangers in that on their day. They could beat them in a one-off game. That's the nature of, maybe if it's a League One or League Two team, it's a different story, because there is a massive gulf there. But top-end championship teams are perfectly capable of beating any Premiership team on their day. And if people I understand the criticism of Hearts, there has to be a criticism. It's the nature of the game that there will be criticism. But some of it's just folks saying Halliday and Lee are not up to it just because they had a bad night there and all this sort of stuff. I mean, criticise them for that night's performance, but don't write them off as footballers on the basis of that Friday night performance. That's the bit I can't get my head round, when people want to... I mean, don't get me wrong, Popescu and Freer have looked pretty suspect for most of this season. I'm not convinced by either of them. But by the same token, I would say they've only actually played 8 or 9 games. Give them a chance to find their feet. I don't expect either of these two players to blossom into great Hearts players by any stretch. But some of the analysis is just real... Yeah. It's simple stuff.
Well, it'll be interesting to see if they bounce back tomorrow against Alloa, as will Hibs against St Johnstone. On Wednesday there's one fixture, it's Hamilton against Aberdeen, and Thursday sees the return of Europa League. Rangers are at home to Benfica. Now, Stephen, Benfica have come out and said that they rested their entire first team at the weekend in preparation for this match. Rangers, have they already qualified, or do they need a draw?
No, they still need to get a result. Well, obviously they threw away their 2-goal lead when they were over.
That's right, 2-2.
Was that? I think did it finish 2-2, 3-3?
It was a draw anyway in Benfica.
But yeah, Rangers, it was a sort of last minute job, I think. So that would have kind of disappointed them, because I think if they'd won that game, they would have been guaranteed to be in the next round. But they're not going to get that lucky again. Obviously, I think Otamendi got sent off after like 15-20 minutes in that first game. So they're going to have to be at it. But if you look at Rangers' record in the last, and Celtic's record in the last couple of years in the Europa League, they've held their own against sort of teams around that sort of area, sort of your Benficas. Rangers I think they beat Braga. I think they've beat Porto at some point in the last few years. So it's not going to be a straightforward walk in the park, but Rangers are capable of going out and doing that. But then it's very difficult for me to sit here and kind of, as a Hearts fan, and think where their mindset will be as a club. Like, how important is it to Rangers to win this domestic league? Are they going all out in the Europa League every single time they play? I mean, certainly their results and their performances seem to suggest that they are. At what stage does it get to where they go, right, okay, that's fine? Or do they not get to that stage? Does Steven Gerrard just want to go, right, we will play cups, leagues, Europe, we will win every single game that we possibly can. I'll rotate the squad as much as I need to, but we are going out to win every single match. And if that is the case, then hats off to them, because that is how you create a winning mentality in a football team. So you've got to hope that they will play at home against a strong Benfica team, which you would imagine it will be. And if they can get a result, then great for Scottish football.
Definitely. We don't want to get bogged down with Neil Lennon too much again, Anthony, but they obviously travel to Sparta Prague. To get the supporters and podcasts like us off his back, he has to get a reaction from his players, doesn't he?
Yeah, but it feels like we're having this conversation every week. That can only go on so long. I mean, I don't know whether the Celtic board are going to make a decision anytime soon, but when you're having this conversation every week, it gets to the point where something needs to be done either way. They either need to go on a win and run, or you just need to bite the bullet, because it's not a healthy situation. It was I keep going back to Hearts, but it was exactly the same situation with Craig Levein, obviously at a higher level with Neil Lennon and Celtic, because they do win more games than Hearts under Levein were winning. Yep. But it's the same sort of situation. You get one decent result and then one bad result, and it's all back to the manager has to go. So you're in that, unless you can get a real run of consistency, winning 5, 6, 7 games in a row.
I'm not sure even that would be enough. Like, I think if, say, Neil Lennon does get 5, 6, 7 wins in a row, and then goes and loses the Scottish Cup final to Hearts, or even loses a league game to Ross County.
Well, that's where it's at. He's in the last chance saloon.
He's in the very last. You're right. You're spot on.
Let's not get too bogged down with Neil Lennon again. We will track it every week here on the Play On podcast. We might be talking about a new manager next week. We might still be talking about Neil Lennon, how he turned it around in Europe and started to get more results. At the weekend, welcomes back the Betfred Cup. It's a reverse fixture for Hearts as they travel to Alloa. Arbroath host Dunfermline, who are flying. Hibs are at home to Dundee. Livingston Ayr United, Motherwell St Johnstone and St Mirren Aberdeen. On Sunday, Celtic, as you mentioned, Stephen, they could slip up here against Ross County, and Falkirk are hosting Rangers in the Betfred Cup. Is there any sort of shock results that maybe stand out for you there that think, we'll put it this way, okay?
Alloa Hearts.
That's what I was going to say.
That's a horrible tie for Hearts. It's one they could win, but again, it's like Arbroath a couple of weeks ago. You wouldn't expect any sort of heroics from Hearts in a game like that.
On the 4G as well, is that?
We saw Dundee struggle there a few weeks ago. We've seen Hearts struggle at Arbroath and Dunfermline the last couple of weeks. I dare say Hearts should win the tie, but I would not be surprised in the slightest if Alloa were to get a result there. Not because Hearts are a poor team, but these are prime examples of matches whereby a team that ordinarily wouldn't be expected to compete raises their game in a cup game.
Yep.
The bigger teams not quite at it, and they get eliminated. I'm not saying that's what will happen, but it would not surprise me in the slightest.
Did you say that Ayr are playing Livingston?
Ayr are playing Livingston, yes.
I fancy Ayr. That's my banana skin.
My one I'm going to say is Arbroath. I think they're going to beat Dunfermline. Even though Dunfermline are flying, I think that's such a hard place to go at Gayfield. You're kind of rolling your eyes there, Stephen. You not agree with me there, or?
Nah, I don't think so.
Regardless, we'll be talking about it next week on the Play On podcast. It's hard to believe that's been almost an hour that we've been talking already. If you're watching this on Facebook, on YouTube, on Twitter, please share it. We can always go back and watch this again. Tell 10 people about the Play On podcast. They'll tell 10 of their mates. We're here every Monday evening on all your social medias. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you again next week on the Play On podcast.